Now let's turn to our final story of the evening. Amnesty International have released a report that documents the abduction and killing at the hands of Shia militia of scores of Sunnis during the war against the Islamic State. Nazli Tazi has more about this.
In a country tarnished by the legacy of foreign occupations and periodic violence, no one predicted the return of militia squads in Iraq, licensed to kill with impunity. These are the latest findings of a report published by Amnesty today. Shi'ite militia groups aligned to the Iraqi government and empowered by the rampant instability plaguing the country have in recent weeks swept into Sunni-inhabited areas and committed countless human rights abuses. Amnesty's report has catalogued scores of abductions, killings and extortions carried out in Baghdad, Samarra and Kirkuk, all of which document consistent patterns of deliberate execution-style killings, threatening to peel back the authority of the central Iraqi government.
What we need to do is create a new political landscape where we don't discriminate between the people, we don't disenfranchise people based on their sect, their religion, or their beliefs.
But the sole purpose for which militia groups such as Badr Brigade and Mahdi Army initially formed was to confront coalition forces and thwart America's geopolitical ambitions in the wider region. The rise of militia violence that emerged soon after Saddam Hussein's removal presented fertile ground for the recruitment of Shi'ite militiamen in and around the capital. Yet the mushrooming of vigilante militia networks following the withdrawal of foreign troops has proven more powerful than before, with groups such as As'ab ibn Ahl al-Haq receiving logistical and ideological backing from Iran. Amnesty's report urges the Iraqi government to do what it can to ensure human rights do not go unprotected in the country. But some commentators predict the situation could worsen in coming weeks without a functioning and unified Iraqi army capable of effectively challenging unofficial governance in militia-controlled areas. The predicament, as Amnesty's report shines a light on, is that militias can look and operate like regular armed forces, but are not regulated by any laws or subject to oversight or accountability mechanisms.
يعني شنو نريد نقول؟ إلى متى نبقى هيك؟ يعني صار لنا سنين على هالوضع هذا، لا تغير وضع أمن، لا تغيرت أمور للأحسن، كله للأسوأ.
Latest advancements by the Islamic State group in Iraq and in Syria has also helped to promote the latest militia resurgence by consolidating informal structures that lay outside government control. This has driven sectarian hostilities and fears to unprecedented levels in an already fragmented country marred by unquenchable violence. Under former President Nouri al-Maliki, militia groups were also encouraged to engage in dirty killing jobs and murdering sprees against Iraq's Sunni minority. While some exaggerate the idea of ancient religious differences to explain what is often painted as a sectarian conflict, the reality reveals a different story. All of Iraq's communities at some point in history have been targets of indiscriminate killings enabled by a fully fledged culture of impunity. Today's car bomb explosions in Shi'ite parts of Baghdad, which killed 30 people, is further evidence of the targeting of not only Sunni communities, but Shi'ite ones too. But can the new Iraqi government headed by Haider Abadi bring disaffected minority groups back into the political fold and enact rule independent of criminal militia groups? One thing that is clear is that plenty remains to be done. Nazli Tazi, The Report.
In the studio to discuss this with me are Mehiyar Kathem, who's a doctoral candidate at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And on the phone, we're joined by Ahmed Al-Mahmood, who's a spokesman for the Iraqi Spring Media Center. Welcome to the programme. So isn't the really big story here that the current Iraqi government isn't really any better than the Maliki government, and that the Shia militias have been doing most of the fighting against the Islamic State?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't have picked that up from the report or from what's happening in Baghdad itself. These militia groups, what we call militia groups, are non-state actors, but are actually very much part of the Iraqi state. Political parties in government head some of these militia groups, and they are the ones who've actually defended Baghdad from collapsing after the fall of Mosul. So they've protected Baghdad and protected Iraq's different minority and different cultural groups in and around Baghdad, and they actually fight alongside Sunni groups also against ISIS. No doubt, I mean, I read the report, and unfortunately it doesn't mention in one word of the occupation or of the invasion that these militia groups came out of. I mean, of course, as Iraqis, we do not want to see militia groups in Iraq ruling Iraq in the way we've seen it. But of course, they play a very important part after the collapse of the Iraqi state, and especially of the Iraqi army, which is a deliberate and intentional project of the American occupation.
Mm. Is that, Ahmed, is that the way you see it?
Well, your guest has mentioned part of the reality, no doubt. But again, he says that they have defended Baghdad as if they are the saviors of Baghdad. The problem we have here is that this government has no army to defend it anymore. Their army has completely collapsed despite billions spent. The country is literally run by Iranian-backed militias, and the idea of them defending Baghdad is actually them preserving an Iranian political process in Baghdad, regardless what they can claim that some are secular and so. This whole political process has been hijacked by Iran. And to be honest, we've been saying this all along, that these militias are adding to the recruitment of ultra-radical organizations, terrorist organizations that are like ISIS. The problem we have today is that the Americans only mention, in the general media, mentions ISIS, but they never mention militias, which are actually forcing Sunnis into taking up arms and actually joining ISIS in this fight. The problem is Iran's tools in Iraq. If these
okay, let me just put that point. Let me just put that point to Mehiyar in the studio. Whether or not you think all of that is true, isn't one bit of it certainly true, that the way in which the Shia militias have been behaving is gluing together the Sunni-ISIS alliance rather than allowing it to be pulled apart?
I'm not so sure of that. We've had sectarian strife largely out of a fractured state-building project. And that project has failed, as we've seen in Mosul and elsewhere. These militia groups grew up from that. What your speaker is saying is that these militia groups, the Shia militia groups, are actually deliberately targeting Sunni groups. But that is not the policy of these groups, of these militia groups, because they are very much in parliament itself. So, but what the problems arise from the fact that there are individuals, and this report actually depicts that, it details this, that there are individuals that are out there to actually extort money from individuals, from families, and so on and so forth. And in the report it says that this is more likely to be from the Sunni areas because they don't have that type of support within the Iraqi government. Whether that's true or not, I personally, I would disagree with that. But actually, what we've seen is the report actually speaks about largely a condition of the individuals within these militia groups, rather than as a coherent policy of these militia groups. And I think this is very important, that we cannot see these militia groups as coherent as coherent groups manned from top to down. It's a number of individuals that are part of this, people who have come from the streets and actually use the name and the label of the militia group to actually attack. And I think this is the case. And
what do you make of Ahmed's claim that these are simply an Iranian project?
I would doubt that very much so. No doubt that the Iraqi government has gotten support from the Iranian government. I mean, America, when Iraq needed America, Iran has always been there. And there are no doubt there are Iranian interests. If you look at Basra in the south, there are significant Iranian interests that we Iraqis, we despise. I mean, this is not something that we want in Iraq. But again, the Kurds recently received support from the KRG, regional Kurdish regional government received support from the Iranians when they needed it. Are they the stooges of the Iranians? Of course not. But it's because that these groups in Baghdad, the Iraqi government is very weak, and we haven't had this type of confidence and support that we needed from the American forces, the American administration. And therefore, we have to rely on other groups. And no doubt, I mean, of course, he has some truth in what he says, that via some of these NGOs, in other cases, political parties and militia groups, there are Iranian agendas being propagated in Iraq. But, I mean, that's part of the fact that there's a fractured state-building project and people are very weak on the ground, and therefore need the support of other groups, much more powerful groups, much more resourceful groups and politically stronger groups in Iraq, like the Iranians, which is what's happening right now.
Mm. So Ahmed, I mean, there is an aspect of this, surely, which you must agree, which is based in the sort of post-occupation reality of Iraq. It isn't simply a product of Iranian influence. It
is a product of a U.S. and the Iranian arrangement to manage Iraq There is no doubt that any Iraqi doubts today that Iran and the states in Iraq are friends. They have absolutely no problems with each other. But when the interests change and the U.S. wanted to expand beyond the arrangement, then we see a conflict of interest. There is no doubt in what you've kindly said. But I would ask your kind guest to deny me yesterday and the pictures before, over the last week, that Qasem Soleimani, who is the Revolutionary Guard commander of Iran in Iraq, is posing with the Kurdish militias, which have entered through the Soleimani area from the Iran border. He's posing with them. He's posing with Asa'ib al-Haq. He's posing with Badr militia, and he has a picture posing with Hadi al-Amiri, who, as you remember, Mr. Jonathan, that last week, was it, when we had a talk, he was threatening Ibadi that either he receives the Ministry of Interior or Defense, or he will start blowing up things in Baghdad, and which we are seeing today. There is a conflict within this government.
Let me put these points to Mehiyar. So how do you respond to those?
Well, it's not in Iran's interest to see an unstable Iraq. I mean, it's in the interest of both America and Iran, actually, to see a stable Iraq, because that project obviously is part of, in part, an Iranian expansionism in the region, and also an American state-building project, which they want to, salvage from the chaos that we've seen. I mean, I would say, in relation, I mean, he's actually just focused on the Iranian issue, and I mean, it's not Iraq. I mean, actually, Iraq is a much more complicated, much more complex context than just Iran taking over Iraq. That is not the case. The case is that Iraqi leaders need the support, international support from actually Maliki when he was in power. He went to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia rejected him outright. And again, I mean, other countries, the Kurds, again, are actually trying to contain Baghdad's ability to govern the country. And this is in their interests. So, and of course, the Gulf also propagates this. There's a strong lobby group in Washington to actually, one of the reasons why we didn't get the proper Air Force, Apache helicopters and F-16s was because of this very strong lobby, and a lobby against Baghdad to actually govern. And again, I mean, your speaker speaks about Iranian interest. Actually, this is a regional interest against Iraq. It's not just from the Iranians to have a manageable Iraq, particularly around Najaf and Karbala, because of the religious issues, but also because Iraq is potentially a strong leader in Iraq, in the region, and therefore we cannot have this. The Kuwait doesn't want this, the UAE doesn't want this, Qatar doesn't want this, Saudi, and of course all the other countries, including Turkey and Iran.
So do you think there's any real progress now under the new regime over the al-Maliki government? Because I think most external observers would say meet the new boss same as the old boss.
Well, they've only reproduced the same system that they've had since 2003 and 4, which is a sectarian allocation of the Iraqi state institutions. And that's why we have these militia groups, because they're very much tied with the political parties that have taken over the Iraqi state institutions. This is part of the problem. But what we need now is to defeat ISIS. I mean, ISIS has become this force. I mean, it's also galvanized a lot of Sunni Iraqi Arabs in the region, in Baghdad and in the region, around Baghdad, including in the areas bordering Al-Anbar. The political system itself, I think, is rotten. It doesn't work, it's corrupt, but it's the one that we have. And therefore, with the speaker that we have to actually look at the realities on the ground. We have to work with what we have. I mean, is this a system that the Iraqis want? Of course not. Is this a system that they've inherited? Yes, of course. And if it's a system that America imposed on Iraq. It's not a system the Iraqi people wanted, and it's actually a system that's brought in these political militia groups and political parties that do not represent the Iraqi people.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid that's all that we've got time for in this discussion and indeed in this episode of The Report. I want to thank all my guests on today's show and to thank you at home for tuning in. Do remember that you can keep up with us by following us on Twitter @IslamChannel and by using the hashtag #TheReport. We're back tomorrow evening at the same time, but for now we'll leave you with footage from northern India, Jammu and Kashmir, where students' daily journey to school requires them crossing a precarious footbridge that collapsed in the recent floods which ravaged the state. Till tomorrow, good night.